Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
Cannibalism, the act of consuming human flesh, has long fascinated and horrified human societies. Often shrouded in myths, taboos, and misconceptions, the subject finds its way into the darkest corners of history and culture. The term cannibalism is derived from the name of the Carib people, a group indigenous to the Caribbean, whom early European explorers accused of practicing ritualistic anthropophagy. Yet cannibalism's complex history extends far beyond the Caribbean, interwoven with colonial narratives, indigenous customs, and the horrors of enslavement. The legends and accounts of cannibalism within enslaved and native communities, whether factual or fabricated, reveal the ways colonial powers sought to control and dehumanize marginalized groups. At the same time, these stories uncover deeper cultural significances and survival strategies in environments marked by desperation, resistance, and spiritual practices. These narratives illuminate the intersections of survival, spirituality, and power dynamics that existed between colonizers, enslaved individuals, and native peoples. The practice of cannibalism is not uniform. It varies widely in purpose and cultural significance. Some accounts describe survival cannibalism during periods of extreme famine, where consuming human flesh became an act of last resort. Others recount ceremonial or ritualistic cannibalism, often tied to religious beliefs or spiritual practices. In some cases, colonial powers exaggerated or fabricated tales of cannibalism to justify their own brutal conquests, portraying indigenous peoples as savages in need of subjugation. These layers of truth, myth, and propaganda create a tapestry of disturbing yet compelling stories that force us to confront humanity's capacity for both resilience and violence. One of the most notorious accusations of ritualistic cannibalism comes from the accounts of European explorers encountering the Carib people. Early accounts by Christopher Columbus and others painted the Caribs as ferocious cannibals, a claim that served to justify European colonization. These narratives emphasize the savagery of the indigenous people, positioning Europeans as bringers of civilization and morality. Yet, many modern scholars question the veracity of these claims, arguing that they were likely exaggerated or fabricated to suit colonial agendas. Archaeological evidence of cannibalistic practices among the Caribs remains inconclusive, with some findings suggesting ceremonial uses of human remains rather than widespread anthropophagy. In North America, tales of cannibalism also emerge among native tribes, often steeped in legend and spiritual significance. Among the Wendat, Huron, and Iroquois Confederacy, for instance, there are accounts of ritual cannibalism tied to warfare and revenge. In these cases, consuming the flesh of an enemy was believed to transfer the enemy's strength or spirit to the victor. This practice, however, was deeply ritualistic and symbolic, rather than an everyday occurrence. Similarly, the stories of the Algonquin-speaking tribes feature the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit associated with cannibalism. According to legend, the Wendigo was a human who had turned to cannibalism during times of famine and was subsequently transformed into a monstrous being consumed by insatiable hunger. These stories functioned as cautionary tales, warning against greed and moral corruption. Cannibalism also appears in the context of enslavement, where enslaved individuals were both victims and alleged perpetrators in colonial narratives. Enslaved Africans were often depicted in European propaganda as barbaric or uncivilized, with cannibalism cited as evidence of their supposed savagery. These depictions dehumanized African people and justified the inhumane conditions of slavery. Yet, there are also documented instances of survival cannibalism among enslaved individuals, particularly during the brutal Middle Passage. Faced with starvation, some captives turned to consuming the bodies of those who had died, a harrowing testament to the extreme conditions they endured. In the Americas, enslaved Africans and native peoples were sometimes accused of cannibalistic rituals by colonial authorities. These accusations often lacked evidence and were used to incite fear and justify violent crackdowns. However, there are accounts of spiritual practices among enslaved communities that involved symbolic acts of consuming human remains, such as drinking blood or using body parts in rituals. These practices were rooted in African spiritual traditions, where the body was believed to hold spiritual power even after death. While not acts of cannibalism in the conventional sense, these rituals were often misinterpreted or deliberately misrepresented by colonial authorities. The story of the Donner Party, a group of American pioneers who resorted to cannibalism while trapped in the Sierra Nevada during the winter of 1846 to 1847, is one of the most infamous cases of survival cannibalism in history. While not directly related to enslaved or native communities, the tale offers a stark reminder of the extreme conditions that can lead humans to consume one another. Similar stories emerge from Native American history, particularly during periods of famine or conflict. For example, during the Great Plains' harsh winters, some tribes faced starvation so severe that cannibalism became a last resort. These acts, though rare, were driven by the same survival instinct seen in the Donner Party, illustrating the universal nature of desperation. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, colonial anthropologists and missionaries often sensationalized reports of cannibalism among indigenous peoples in Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. These accounts, often exaggerated or fabricated, served to portray colonized people as primitive and in need of European intervention. In some cases, these stories were based on misunderstandings of cultural practices, such as the use of human bones in rituals or the symbolic consumption of body parts. The legacy of these narratives continues to shape perceptions of indigenous cultures, perpetuating stereotypes that obscure the true complexity and diversity of their traditions. The spiritual dimension of cannibalistic rituals is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of these practices. In many cultures, consuming human flesh or using human remains in rituals was believed to bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual worlds. For example, in certain African spiritual traditions, the consumption of human blood or flesh was thought to confer spiritual power or connect the living with their ancestors. Similarly, some Native American tribes viewed cannibalism as a way to honor the dead or absorb their spiritual essence. These practices were deeply symbolic and often carried out with great reverence, in stark contrast to the sensationalized depictions of savage rituals popularized by colonial narratives. The intersection of cannibalism with slavery and colonialism highlights the power dynamics and cultural misunderstandings that define these systems. For enslaved individuals, accusations of cannibalism were often a tool of dehumanization, stripping them of their humanity and justifying their exploitation. For Native peoples, these accusations served as a pretext for violence and land theft, casting them as obstacles to civilization. Yet, within these narratives, there are also stories of resistance and resilience, where enslaved and indigenous communities used their cultural practices, including those misunderstood as cannibalistic, to assert their identity and spirituality in the face of oppression. The myths and legends surrounding cannibalism among enslaved and native tribes are a testament to humanity's fascination with the macabre and the unknown. These stories, whether rooted in truth or constructed as propaganda, reveal the ways in which power, culture, and survival intersect in the most extreme circumstances. They challenge us to confront the darker aspects of our history and to recognize the resilience and complexity of the communities that endured these harrowing experiences. In doing so, we gain a deeper understanding of the human condition and the ways in which societies navigate the boundaries of morality, survival, and spirituality.